Hi, I'm Bryan Gillis, Executive Practice Lead, Quality Solutions and Customer Analytics at the Northridge Group. I'm here with our Executive Advisor, Greg Adams. He's a former EVP and COO of a Fortune 500 financial and real estate services firm. Today, I'm going to talk to Greg about his latest blog, which focuses on how operational analytics can be used to rethink office and workforce models to adapt to the post-COVID-19 environment. We'll be discussing how data can inform business decisions regarding future needs for people, corporate real estate, and technology. So Greg, what advice would you offer business leaders as they assess their options for safely and effectively running their businesses after COVID-19?
So Brian, one of the key things here, you got to find a new way to work. Some of this was planned as part of digital transformation. So there was a plan to go through kind of a remote mobile workforce model. But the pandemic hitting changed all the rules. And so you were digitally transformed in days or weeks. And so what you had planned to do in February completely changed in March. The greatest impact of the crisis, though, is on your big three costs. It's your people, it's your technology, and it's your real estate. And so trying to get out and through this pandemic, you've got to reassess your plans and you've got to chart a new way to address those three main areas. Data will be foundational in making these informed decisions going forward.
So Greg, what will post-COVID-19 office and workforce models look like?
So it's interesting. So much like after 9/11, COVID-19 is another tragic defining chapter kind of in our history. So what we expected before and what we'll see post are going to be completely different. So imagine yourself back in 2002, 2003 with security in the office, security getting on an airplane. It's stuff we now kind of take for granted, but at that time, completely life-altering. In many ways, getting back to the office, so kind of that re-entry back in, also going to be completely different. You're going to have social distancing. You're probably not going to have everyone in the office at the same time. Your office space is probably going to be reimagined and changed. So the community kitchen, probably not going to be a community kitchen anymore. Your community kind of dining area, that may actually have to turn into a conference room to accommodate more space. So think back to what it was, post 9/11, post pandemic, you're going to go through the same trials and tribulations. Another great example is, temperature screening. That's almost the security of the post pandemic.
So after making this transition, do you think many companies will choose to operate this way in some capacity going forward?
I think absolutely. I think it's almost been sprung out. So people were always wanting to work remotely. Now they've kind of had that opportunity and that chance. I think for people to want to go back full-time in the office, especially probably over the next year or two, as we hope there's a vaccine and hope there's a cure. People are not going to want to rush back onto public transit. They're not going to want to rush back to a full office. So I think remote is here to stay. That was a trend everyone was seeing before. As you get to more of a mobile workforce, I think this just amplifies it. But one of the key things is you've got to be able to measure how effective people are able to work remotely, how effective your teams are, how effective both mentally and capably people are able to work from home.
How do you think how do you think that the corporations were prepared for it, right? Especially when you talk about kind of people, process, and technology. Back in our day, right, the world, we always had some remote access, but I'm not sure the remote access had the full capabilities. Like I think about collaboration software, I think about different infrastructure. Do you think companies were prepared to kind of work this way, or they're kind of figuring it out as it goes?
I think you've got some companies, I think you're going to have your classic 80-20. You're going to have 10% that absolutely nailed this. You're going to have 80% that are kind of sitting in the middle, and you got 10% that if they don't get a clue soon, they're going to struggle.
Do you think that, what I'm seeing talking to clients, that they're a little surprised about the efficiency with moving the majority of their workforce remotely? Do you think they're a little surprised by the efficiency they still maintained in this remote environment?
I think they are. I think, there's a couple reasons. One is the stigma of, look at you and I right now. You're in your house, I'm in my house, we're having a conversation. So the stigma of someone being in the office and somebody being at home completely gone away. Everyone was at home. So I think you've reduced the stigma, and I think people do adapt quickly. I think there's been now a freedom. I'll use my wife as an example. I think, she said it last night. She goes, I work more hours, but if I need to take a kid to a doctor or I need to do this appointment, I can do it.
Yeah, well, I think that's...
So it's flexibility, but, kind of giving people flexibility gives them an opportunity and a willingness to actually do more.
Yeah, what I think that leads into is really thinking about corporate real estate differently, because if your efficiency or productivity didn't drop by a drastic number when we all went remote because of the pandemic, what do you think that people need to think about from a real estate perspective as we come out of the pandemic?
So I think you've got to adapt your kind of conference room areas to allow for what I call a hybrid meeting. So it's people both remote as well as in the office, because no one will deny there's a true benefit to being able to have face-to-face meetings. The whiteboard, that's probably the thing I miss the most, is where's my whiteboard?
Right.
So being able to have those interactions is key, but you also have to understand that some people aren't going to be able to come into the office, and quite frankly, some people won't want to come to the office right now. So how do you include them also? So it's a hybrid model. Schools are dealing with the same situation. How do you deal with e-learning, which in my opinion was a kind of a disaster?
Yeah.
Because it was forced upon them. I think they've had time to reflect. And so in person and remote, you have to figure out that combination. And that's where data becomes really critical. Understanding the productivity, understanding the volumes that are required, the volume of work that's getting done, has that changed? You've got to be able to measure things.
And what you're saying there, I think, is extremely interesting. Is I don't think that business leaders have had to think about combining different data sets, right, as they think about corporate real estate or what their workforce looks like going forward. So, I mean, what I feel is like, as a business leader, we now need to take different data sets and combine them together to see what the post-COVID-19 looks like. Do you have any insight of like, what are the different areas that they should think about, like as they look through this moving forward?
Yes. So this is where you're going to have to collapse some walls and some silos that have been built. So you're going to have HR information that is critical. So your employees, where are they located? Kind of their roles, what is their function? Because that's going to determine whether they can be remote or whether they need to be in the office. You're going to have your finance group that quite honestly is going to tell you how much you have to spend or not spend. You've got an IT group that can track an immense amount of information on, what systems are people accessing? Are they able to get to their files? Was it a file and print server that required you to be on a network, or is this something I can access through the cloud? You got your CRE group that's trying to determine the occupancy and how do you fit out the space and how do you make things work? These groups are going to have to work together, and information is going to be input to output, and information is going to have to flow back and forth to truly get a vision of this is how we need to set things up.
Yeah, and I guess, traditionally, I'm assuming that those data sets weren't available to combine different if-then scenarios. until now. It's going to be you're going to be forced to put those data sets into if-then scenarios moving forward to kind of come up with what the optimal office environment and workforce would look like going forward, in my opinion.
This is true data modeling because just the rules among states are completely different.
Right.
So in this state, I might get 75% capacity. In this state, I might get 25%. And so you've got to be able to model where people can effectively get back into an office.
Yeah.
And then you've got the whole, even within a large metro area. Do you have satellite offices, and where should people logically try to congregate and meet? And how do you impact that in a positive way?
Do you think that most corporations, one, have the talent and the agility to do what's going to be necessary moving forward from just the data and operational modeling, as we move out of post-COVID?
Some companies definitely will have the capability. Have they ever used that capability for something like this? In many cases, not. And so someone from the outside be able to come in, hey, these are kind of your inputs and outputs. I think, we'd all probably agree over the last 5 years, there's an immense amount of data out there. Do we know what to do with it? That's
right.
The key. What do we do with the data? How do we turn it into knowledge as opposed to a big giant data lake that turns into a pond that's just filthy dirty?
Yeah. What I think about is, the data exists, and there's different data models that could be tapped, or you could build different agile data models. But what I think is going to be critical moving forward is, okay, those data sets, combining them in different models, but also someone to lead those discussions around what data sets should be tapped and when, and then how do you potentially take those models and operationalize them, not only through HR, IT, or tech, but also into finance, right? Because threading that needle through those different, let's just say, workflows or silos traditionally just hasn't been done before. And, I think the people that do it quicker, faster, and better within these next 4 to 6 to 9 months will have a tremendous competitive advantage moving forward.
Yeah, huge competitive advantage, but also you're setting yourself up now for the next 5 years. Because whether it's another pandemic, God forbid, but there's other crises that will occur that will, might be local, it might be national, it might be international, that you've got to navigate through. And you can go back onto, this was a great exercise, put us into a place, it's now systematic, now we can do something with it. And I'd equate that to what happened, after 9/11, business continuity and disaster recovery. That became imperative. You just had that. You did it. You lived it.
Is there any other industries that have done this, not by pandemic or more because of need of the business? Is there any industries that have done it well and other industries are going to kind of be forced to kind of follow in their footsteps a little bit?
I think banking is really trying to figure out what real estate is required to kind of service their customer base. And, moving more from, I'm going to have a bank location on every corner in every area, I'm just going to saturate the market, to more of, I'll have, places you can walk in and bank, but my online presence is going to be key to me moving forward. And so you don't abandon one for the other. They need to complement each other.
And that's a drastic shift in operational models, right? And then the people that do it really well could see some different cash flows moving forward, right? And then the people who don't, right, are on the opposite side of that equation, and they're in some trouble.
Right. So people are moving. Now, are they moving in the right direction? To be seen, but you've got to be at least moving forward.
Sure.
And then be able to adjust over time. But to do nothing is not an option.
So Greg, we've talked about data in different forms or fashion over our conversation. So what do you think these data models produce post COVID-19 for corporations?
Yeah, I think you take an operational analytics approach, and that's kind of your umbrella.
Yep.
And so your data will feed into this approach. But the key, I think, about operational analytics is you're trying to also talk about the process. You're talking about the interrelationships among these different groups. How do you get a free flow of information that you can analyze and make informed decisions, as opposed to kind of the gut decisions that have been made before? How do you truly take all this data, scenario plan, make a good decision, and then continue to move forward and always be able to reference back? Scenarios will change, inputs will change. How do you make different decisions throughout time?
Thank you for your time today, Greg. I really appreciate the discussion and look forward to us moving forward together.
No, fantastic. Thanks for having me.